Hi everyone, it's Miss Carla from the Elanco Library. I hope you guys are doing well. We're going to continue on with another video of Classics with Carla. We are still reading of Anne of Green Gables. We're going to read part of chapter 2 because it is a rather long chapter. So when we left off, the Cuthberts decided to adopt an orphan. They wanted an orphan boy. Miss Spencer was in charge of bringing the child to town to meet the Cuthberts and be part of their family. It was already a done deal and stuff like that. So we're going to read on. Matthew Cuthbert went to the train station to pick up their new child. So let's see what happens. So it's chapter 2. Matthew Cuthbert is surprised. Matthew Cuthbert and the mare jogged comfortably over the 8 miles to Bright River. It was a pretty road running along snug farmsteads and now and again a bit of fir wood to drive through or a hollow where wild plums hung out their filmy bloom. The air was sweet with the breath of many apple orchards, and the meadow sloped away in the distance to horizon mists of pearls and purple. Matthew enjoyed the drive after his own fashion, except during the moments when he met women and had to nod to them. For in Prince Edward Island, you are supposed to nod to all, even if you don't know them. Matthew dreaded all women except Marilla and Miss Rachel. He had an uncomfortable feeling that the mysterious creatures were secretly laughing at him. He may have been quite right in thinking so, for he was an odd-looking person with an ungainly figure and long iron gray hair that touched his stooping shoulders, and had a full, soft brown beard which he had worn since he was 20. In fact, he had looked at 20 very much as he looked at 60, lacking a little of the grayness. When he reached Bright River, there was no sign of any train. He thought it was too early, so he tied his horse in the yard of the small Bright River Hotel and went over to the train station. The long platform was almost deserted. The only living creature in sight was a girl who was sitting on a pile of shingles at the extreme end. Matthew, barely noting that it was a girl, sidled past her as quickly as possible without looking at her. Had he looked, he could hardly have failed to notice the tense rigidity and expectation of her attitude and expression. She was sitting there, waiting for something or somebody. And since sitting and waiting was the only thing to do just then, she sat and waited with all her might and main. Matthew encountered the station master locking up the ticket office preparatory to get home for supper, and asked him if the 5:30 train would soon be along. The 5:30 train has been in and gone half an hour ago, answered the brisk official. But there was a passenger girl for you. A little girl. She was sitting there on the shingles, and I asked her to go into the ladies' waiting room, but she informed me gravely that she preferred to stay outside. There was more scope for imagination, she said. She's a case, I should say. I'm not expecting a girl, said Matthew blankly. It's a boy I've come for. He should be here, and Miss Alexander Spencer was to bring him over from Nova Scotia for me. The station master whistled. Guess there's a mistake, he said. Miss Spencer came off the train with that girl and gave her into my charge. Said you and your sister were adopting her from an orphan asylum and that you would be along for her presently. That's all I know about it, and I haven't got any more orphans concealed hereabouts. I don't understand, said Matthew helplessly, wishing that Marilla was at hand to cope with the situation. Well, you better question the girl, said the station master carelessly. I dare say she'll be able to explain. She's got a tongue of her own, that's certain. And maybe they were out of boys of the brand you wanted. He walked away. He was hungry, and the unfortunate Matthew was left to do with which was much harder for him than burying a lion's den. Walking up to a girl, a strange girl, an orphan girl, demand of her why she wasn't a boy. Matthew groaned in spirit as he turned about and shuffled gently down the platform towards her. She had been watching him ever since he had past her, and she had her eyes on him now. Matthew was not looking at her and would not have seen what she was really like if he had been. But an ordinary observer would have seen this. A child about 11, garbed in very short, very tight, and in a very ugly dress of yellowish-gray wincey. She wore a faded brown sailor hat, and beneath the hat, extending down her back, were 2 braids of very thick, decidedly red hair. Her face was small, white, and thin, and also much freckled. Her mouth was large, and so were her eyes, which looked green in some lights and moods and gray in others. So far, the ordinary observer and extraordinary observer might have seen that the chin was very pointed and pronounced, and that the big eyes are full of spirit and vivacity. That the mouth was sweet-lipped and expressive, that the forehead was broad and full. In short, our discerning, extraordinary observer might have concluded that no commonplace soul inhabited the body of the stray woman-child, of whom shy Matthew Cuthbert was so ludicrously afraid of. Matthew, however, was spared the ordeal of speaking first, for as soon as she concluded that he was coming to her, she stood up, grasping with one thin brown hand the handle of a shabby old-fashioned carpet bag, and the other she held out to him. "I suppose you are Mr. Matthew Cuthbert of Green Gables?" she said in a peculiarly clear, sweet voice. "I am very glad to see you. I was beginning to be afraid you weren't coming for me, and I was imagining all the things that might have happened to prevent you. I had made up my mind that if you didn't come for me tonight, I'd go down the track to the big wild cherry tree at the bend and climb up it to stay the night. I wouldn't be a bit afraid, and it would be lovely to sleep in a wild cherry tree, all white with bloom in the moonshine, don't you think? You could imagine you were dwelling in marble halls, couldn't you? And I was quite sure you would come for me in the morning, for you didn't tonight." Matthew had taken the scrawny little child awkwardly in his, and then and there he decided what to do. He could not tell this child with the glowing eyes that there had been a mistake. He would take her home and let Marilla do that. She couldn't be left at Bright River anyhow, no matter what mistake had been made, so all questions and explanations might as well be deferred until he was safely back at Green Gables. "Sorry I was late," he said shyly. "Come along, the horse is over in the yard. Give me your bag." "Oh, I can carry it," the child responded cheerfully. "It isn't heavy. I've got all my worldly goods in it, but it isn't heavy. And if it is carried in just a certain way, the handle pulls out, so I'd better keep it because I know the exact knack of it. It is an extremely old carpet bag. Oh, I'm very glad you've come, even if it would have been nice to sleep in a wild cherry tree. We've got to drive a long piece, haven't we? Miss Spencer said it was 8 miles. I'm glad because I love driving. Oh, it seems so wonderful that I'm going to live with you and belong to you. I've never belonged to anybody, not really. But the asylum was the worst. I don't suppose you ever were an orphan in an asylum, so you possibly can't understand what it is like. It's worse than anything you can imagine. Miss Spencer said it was wicked of me to talk like that, but I didn't mean to be wicked. It's so easy to be wicked without knowing, isn't it? They were good, you know, the asylum people, but there's so little scope for the imagination in an asylum. Only Jess and the other orphans. It was pretty interesting to imagine things about them. Sorry, my cat's upset that I'm not playing with her. To imagine that perhaps the girl who sat next to you was really the daughter of a belted earl who had been stolen away from her parents in her infancy by a cruel nurse who had died before she can confess. I used to lie awake at nights and imagine things like that because I didn't have time in the day. I guess that's why I'm so thin. I am dreadful thin, ain't it? With this, Matthew's companion stopped talking, partly because she was out of breath and partly because they had reached the buggy. Not another word did she say until they had left the village they were driving down, and they were driving down a steep little hill, the road part of which had been cut so deeply into the soft soil that the banks fringed with bloomy wild cherry trees and slim white birches were several feet above their heads. All right, so we're going to end right there. That is the middle of chapter 2. And on next video, we will finish the chapter. All right. So it's kind of funny. It looks like the Cuthberts didn't get a girl. So hopefully everything turns out well. All right. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye.